Hey everybody, and welcome back to another video from Northeast Christian Apologetics. My name's Simon Williams, and today we're going to be continuing our discussion on God's omniscience. And I'm not going to lie to you, this video is not going to be for everyone. We're going to be doing some pretty serious heavy lifting, mentally speaking here, and even the heavy lifting that we're going to be doing here today is going to be the light stuff. Also, I want to say thank you very much for watching these videos, and if you find them to be helpful, if you like the idea of studying philosophy and theology, and you think that the perspective of even people like atheists are useful for building your understanding of God, then please consider subscribing and liking the videos, and also sharing them on your social media accounts. Thank you very much. In our last video, we were discussing some arguments against the idea that there can be an omniscient God. And these arguments were presented to us by an atheist named Patrick Grimm. We had discussed two of his arguments in the previous episode or part, and today we're going to be discussing his final kind of challenge against the idea of an omniscient God. This is his final attempt to show that omniscience itself is an incoherent attribute. We left off with Patrick saying, omniscience, even if limited to the propositional, and even if propositions were taken to include knowledge involving essential indexicals, would require a being to know all objective truths. It can clearly be established, however, that there can be no plurality of all truths. There is no all of the sort omniscience would require. The purpose of this upcoming argument is to demonstrate that there is no such thing as an all propositions. The idea that there can be an all propositions itself is incoherent. It tries to show that if it's not possible for all propositions to be contained within a single group, then it can't be possible that there is an omniscient being. It drives at this part of Grimm's omniscient definition for all propositions. This argument is designed to show that all propositions is impossible. How does it go about doing that? Well, I hope that you have a seatbelt because you're going to need to buckle in for this one. Grimm starts off by introducing us to sets. Yep, this is going to get into set theory. Grimm says, the result is most simply expressed in terms of sets, that there can be no set of all truths. For suppose any set of truths T, truth 1, truth 2, truth 3, these symbols here are meant to indicate that they are each individual propositions. These dots indicate that the propositions continue. Actually, I'm pretty sure you understood that one. Grimm goes on to say, and to consider the elements of its power set PT, containing all subsets of T. A power set is a set that contains all the subsets of the generating set. In this case, T is the generating set. Actually, it might be simpler to start off with a smaller set. Let's say the set S has the members A and B. It can be shown that the power set of S has the following members. As you can see, there are more members in the power set than there are in the generating set. The power set has 4 members, while the generating set had 2. This is necessarily true for any set that has greater than 2 members. As a matter of fact, the number of members in a power set increases exponentially as compared to the members of the generating set. You can see that in this example. You see what I mean? But how is it relevant? Well, this theorem shows that for any set, you can generate a subset that has more members in it. If your set contains propositions, then you can have a power set that has more propositions in it. And that goes for power sets too. You can take a power set and then take a power set of the power set. And that power set of the power set has more members in it than the previous power set. What I'm saying is that power set then can become a generating set. Yeah, I know, I'm going to try to take it easy and keep going from there. Going back to Patrick Grimm's T example, let's say that set has an infinite number of members, which is what Grimm says. By Cantor's theorem, we know that the power set of any set is larger, contains more members, than the set itself. There will then be more truths than are contained in T. But T can be taken as any set of truths. For any set of truths, we can show that there are more truths than it contains. There can therefore be no set of all truths. Some people who see the consequence of this argument are tempted to say then, well, God's omniscience just is the power set. But that doesn't escape the argument. Because, as I said earlier, you can just take a power set of the power set and would have then more propositions than you did in the power set. So at any time, God's knowledge set doesn't contain all the possible propositions. And if there is a set that necessarily has more members than God's knowledge set, then there are propositions that God doesn't have. It seems inescapable, but wait, it gets worse. We can use the power set to generate two new sets, in which we can call one set the conjunctive set C, and the other set the disjunctive set D. What is a conjunctive and a disjunctive? Well, I'm glad that you asked. And I know what you're thinking, wow, that's an ugly table. I made it myself. Conjunctives and disjunctives are rules used to determine truth when two propositions are brought together. It could be more propositions. It can be any number of propositions, really. A conjunctive means that there is a connection. If proposition P and proposition Q are brought together, then the resulting new proposition is only true if both P and Q are true. A disjunctive means that there is a lack of connection. It's determining that if one of the original propositions is true, then the new proposition is true. If either P or Q is true, then the new proposition is true. So for the first set C, we take the conjunction of each element of each member of power set S. So if we have a set that equals A, B, C, then we can generate the following power set. Then the corresponding conjunctive set would look like this. We then can do the same thing with the set D, the disjunctive set. And then we can unite the two into a new united set. And this new set U is filled with many, many more true propositions than there were in the original set S. One other thing to note with the disjunctive and the conjunctive sets, in this situation, we're only dealing with true propositions. So we don't ever weed out any of the new propositions because they're all true. And so this new U set, which is the combination of the conjunctive set and the disjunctive set, is just, a ton. It has a ton more propositions and a lot more. And you can do this again and again for any set. So this argument, when followed through, actually shows that God has a tiny portion of propositions of the possible propositions. God's set of propositions is minuscule in comparison to the other set of propositions. And that set of propositions is minuscule in comparison to the set that could be generated from that power set. Pretty heavy stuff, to be sure. So what is the Christian to do with this information? Well, let's just take a look at what a set would look like using real propositions. How about instead of looking at the set S as A, B, and C, let's have it look like roses are red, violets are blue, sugar is sweet. And we're going to say, for the sake of argument, that this set is the set that corresponds with God's knowledge. Now what you see on the screen is the power set of the set that we just created, the set of God's knowledge. And in this case, we're only going to take a look at the conjunctives. Now that we have created this set that contains a bunch of new propositions, the proponent of the argument can now ask God these kinds of questions. Is it true that roses are red? God would answer, yes, roses are red. The proponent could then ask God, is it true that violets are blue? God would answer, yes, violets are blue. But then if you were to ask God the very tricky question, but God, is it true that roses are red and violets are blue? According to this argument, God would have to say, I don't know. Congratulations, you just stumped the Almighty. Again, I know what you're thinking. Really? Is that all it takes? And the answer, of course, is, yep, that's all it takes. If you agree with Grimm's definition of omniscience. Please remember that Grimm's definition is dealing with whether or not there can be an all propositions. As Grimm says, this argument seems to strike at a crucial assumption essential to any notion of omniscience, that truth and knowledge themselves have an intrinsic maximum. With regard to both truth and knowledge, that assumption is provably false. If neither truth or knowledge can have a maximum degree, there can be no degree of knowledge that counts as maximal, and thus there can be no omniscience. And I couldn't agree more. With this part, at least. I'd like you to recall my favorite verse regarding God's omniscience that I quoted back in part 1. Good old Psalms 147:5. Great is our Lord and abundant in power. His understanding is without number. Remember how much I emphasized the without number translation? In my humble opinion, Grimm's argument goes a long way to prove what this verse is saying here. And also goes to prove that we shouldn't define omniscience in the way that Grimm, or even how it's defined in Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview. I think that any definition that commits us to propositions being all or every ought to be abandoned. Grimm's argument is one reason why I chose to define omniscience in the way that I did. Just as another reminder, we defined omniscience as, for any proposition, God knows whether or not it corresponds with reality. The word any, as I'm sure that we all understand at this point, is being used here to mean to refer to one or some of a thing or number of things, no matter how much or how many. Admit it, you thought I was crazy for making up my own definition. But also remember that we're defining knowledge here as something like justified true belief. In part 1, I mentioned that beliefs are often manifested as propositions. But it is not necessary to tie beliefs to propositions, as we discussed in part 2. And personally, that's why I'm inclined to believe that God's knowledge is intuitive and non-propositional. That is to say, God grasps any concrete whole in its fullness and doesn't need to extend his knowledge, inferentially or otherwise, by isolating separate propositions. Apart from communicating and relating with us, God has no need to carve up his intuition of reality into separate propositions. So God can choose to manifest his beliefs as propositions whenever he's communicating with us. And then it becomes the case that those propositions can generate an infinite number of sets of other new propositions. We can easily agree that there are new propositions and there always will be new propositions, but there isn't any new knowledge. That's probably why a lot of you were like, really? When I mentioned that God doesn't know that roses are red and violets are blue. And I think you're right to be skeptical. But we have to realize that that is the consequence if we are to define God's knowledge as requiring all propositions or every proposition. Defined that way, Grimm is right to say that omniscience is impossible. But again, that's why it becomes important to mention that we don't define omniscience that way. We define it as, for any proposition, God knows whether or not that proposition corresponds with reality. And with that, I think it's time for everyone's favorite part of the videos, the recap. We have been discussing Grimm's last challenge to the possibility of there being an omniscient being. He goes the route of set theory, which we were all very excited about. Basically, the argument takes two rules from set theory. No matter the collection S, there is a collection PS, or power set, of the set S. And no matter the set, the power set has more things in it, even if the set is infinite. And that's basically the argument. Using those rules from set theory, it is shown that there can never be an all propositions or every propositions. And in this video, we agreed with Grimm. However, once again, the definition of omniscience that we established in part 1 remains unscathed. As long as the Christian chooses to define omniscience as it is shown on the screen, I think the Christian is fully within their rights to say that God is omniscient. It also happens to be the case that the Christian can say that God is more than omniscient. How is that? Well, I already addressed some of it in earlier material, but for the rest of it, you'll just have to wait. That's right, another cliffhanger. Thanks again for watching, and I really hope that this video is edifying to you and helpful to you, and it helps strengthen your faith and knowledge of God. I hope that this interaction with the atheist Patrick Grimm helps you to see how an atheist, or the perspective of an atheist, or the thoughts of an atheist can help you sharpen your own philosophy and theology. And if you're someone who still thinks that atheists have no value to add to the theology discussion, then stop. Please don't forget to leave a like or a dislike, and also feel free to comment if you have any questions or concerns or suggestions. I'd love to hear them. If anything in the video is wrong, then My bad. If anything in the video is really helpful to you, then thank God. Don't forget to subscribe, and please visit us on our website at www.nechristianapologetics.com. Thanks so much again for watching, and God bless.